Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How's the hangover?
Y'all hear us all right?
All right.
A little bit more, though. Y'all hear us all right?
Yeah.
All right. I know. Speaking of hangovers, I just want to make sure they're okay.
Yeah, it's great to see everyone here. Day 2 of AWE. I'm Tony Parisi. I work at Unity doing VR stuff.
I'm Sean White. I work at Mozilla doing all the ways in which we look at the future of the internet, including all the mixed reality work.
Yeah, and we thought it was a good idea to get together and chat. Sean and I have known each other for a long time. You can read the bios, don't want to do it that way. So what we thought we'd do is we'd share a little bit of what we do now, and then go into the way back a little bit as it's relevant to where we think we're all headed. So Sean, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, and just
mini bio.
We talked about this. Full transparency, I come from a very transparent company. We haven't done this before, so we're going to experiment as we do it. But I wanted to ask a quick question. How many of you out here come from a technical background? If you could raise your hands. Oh, wow, great. How many of you...
Oh, they actually got Stefano's talk then. That's good. Woof.
How many of you were here about 10 years ago? Great. 5 years ago? Awesome. Last year? Awesome. And this is your first year? Wow. That is amazing.
Welcome, everyone. Yeah.
All right, good. Thank you. Now I at least have a sense for who's out there. Right, so a little bit about myself. I'll wind all the way back, but it's here in the Bay Area. I moved to the Bay Area in '88, where people were creating things. And we also had some pretty big earthquakes just after that. I had nothing to do with it. But at the time, there was a lot going on, right? So end of '88, beginning of the '90s, we just made a shift at Stanford from BitNet to the internet. And then I was fortunate enough to work at a place called Interval Research, where we were doing experiments. My own research was initially with Gopher Space, which was the predecessor to the modern web. I see a couple of people nodding their heads out there. That's right. And then the early web, and around VR and graphics. And so at Interval Research, the very first project I did at the Banff Center for the Arts was with Brenda Laurel, Rachel Strickland, Michael Neymark, Rob Tao, this group of people with these super diverse backgrounds, not computer science trained, but from architecture and theater. And it was asking questions about what this VR experience could be. And so you have two things going on. One, this VR work that's happening in '92 cost about $1 million to drive each eye. So imagine that, not a particularly democratizing thing. And then the web, which did feel democratizing. Anybody could use it. Fast forward a little bit, SIGGRAPH 2001 is when I got my first AR experience. This was, if you haven't seen it, there's a project called Contact Water. It was funded by the Japanese government, and it was basically this amazing thing where now instead of VR where you're immersed in that world, you look down at your hands and there is this spectacular thing. It was a dolphin at the time floating in your hand. It was multi-user, super powerful, and it was magic. It was pure magic. Fast forward a little bit more. I'd done some startups, was fortunate enough to do some of that democratized web work with this newfangled thing called Webmail, which we sold the company, and that helped me go back to graduate school. And so I ended up working with Steve Feiner, doing a PhD around augmented reality, really experimenting with what it means to do some of the first mobile outdoor augmented reality. And this is, again, the early 2000s. What visualization means, how you think about that. Fast forward a little bit more. I took some of that and we explored what that meant at Nokia and then now at Mozilla, asking the questions as the chief R&D officer, what's the future of how we interact with the internet? What does it mean for us when we don't just have laptops, not just mobile phones, but we are interacting with the world around us through mixed reality, speaking, connecting with devices around us. And so that's how I got here. There's a part that I'll mention after Tony introduces himself, which is where I met Tony, which is way, way back.
Yeah, so late 80s, I was in music school. I decided I needed to get out of that, get a job. and went into computer science because I'd been good at math. Every job I got after I came out of college, somehow I found the 3D graphics project to work on. I came to realize that years later, it was because as a kid I went and saw Star Wars. And that image of Princess Leia on the tabletop like never left the back of my mind. And so I don't know how that happened, but I ended up becoming a 3D graphics programmer, but not professionally for a while, but I'd find the little projects at my first jobs at a financial company or a company doing data visualization or whatever, and I'd get the 3D gig. That led to meeting a fellow named Mark Pesci when we were still living in Boston, my then girlfriend. We got married, moved to San Francisco, for San Francisco, not really for tech or anything, but I figured I could get a good tech job there. And I'm not 5 minutes here, and Mark shows me this, and I'd already been working in the web. I had a similar thing. We went from the old internet to the internet to like Mosaic coming out. So what year is that, 93, 94? So I meet Mark, and he shows me a spinning 3D like chess piece on a PC. And he's like, isn't this amazing? It was kind of crappy looking, but it was real-time 3D graphics on a personal computer. And we're talking like early 90s where 3D graphics was still super science fiction-y, but the PC and the web was about to explode. That turned into this project called VRML, which was doing 3D on the internet. It wasn't really VR. Mark had had a VR startup trying to work on hardware, trying to work on making those $1 million headsets affordable for everybody. Obviously, it was way too early. So I moved through that trajectory. VRML was a really great idea before its time, a little bit in terms of the technology, infrastructure, being ready for it. But those themes and those things we learned continue to this day, and it's a lot of what Sean and I are going to talk about today. Along the way, I did various different company startups and was always doing 3D graphics for, basically not for gaming. So then in 2016, the folks at Unity found me. I'd sort of been pulled out of mothballs when VR exploded again. People were like, hey, let's find this old expert and talk to him. Turned out I still had a few things that might be relevant to contribute to the world, and was doing a lot of different things in VR when Unity found me. And they wanted to find someone who wasn't a game business person because they saw what was happening with our engine, which is that everyone was using it for everything in XR. A lot of VR, a lot of AR, because it was free to get started, it's affordable, it's cheap, supports all the platforms, yada, yada, marketing speak. But this is why Unity was really about to take off on the XR side. And we find the auto industry is using Unity, all these different places that was not the game business. Hey, non-game person, help us figure that out from a business standpoint, and someone who's had this purview for a long time. So that's my trajectory, and that's still my job here, though these days I'm focused on our advertising business and bringing marketing content into XR, in particular AR on our phones now. So that's my day gig. So our paths did cross from time to time over the years. Okay, so I want to hear your story.
Well, and it was specifically...
Because I forgot how we met. This is my, I'm like, senior moments here. I have no idea.
This was specifically at a party at Mark's apartment, where there was a Silicon Graphics machine, right? That was those things, the Silicon Graphics reality engine with
like
all of
a graphics workstation.
Yeah, that's right. With a vector cube slowly rotating, and a bunch of people crowded around it. And, so people are drinking, there's music going on. Was that like well before Massive Attack? There was some, there was a bunch in there, right? But it was amazing because it was 3D on the web, right? Work that some folks at Silicon Graphics, other places had tried to do, but really hadn't been able to touch. And that was what was amazing to me about the work you and Mark were doing, was it was combining these peanut butter and chocolate to make this amazing thing.
Absolutely. I mean, great ideas. Again, though, the infrastructure where we were was dial-up modems. How many people in the room know what a dial-up modem is? I mean, actually, only about half of you. Okay, this is over. No, I'm kidding. Right, so that was the thing that went over your phone line to make internet stuff happen, and it made noises, and that was the way people were communicating in the early web, and it was affordable and all that. And these PCs, you could start going to stores and buying PCs for not that much money in early 90s dollars. And we were trying to do 3D on the internet. Oh, and then the 3D part, you needed to actually, it wasn't laptops, you had a tower PC and you'd buy a specialized card and shove it into the computer. And so we were nuts trying to do that then, but I think everyone was so excited about the idea that 3D was a form of communication that was much more universal than just text and images, much more human friendly, We'd all read the science fiction canon of the time, Neuromancer, Snow Crash, these visions of getting together in 3D and communicating together in 3D. And so we thought that that medium connected over the web, the great equalizer, the great democratizer, was going to happen. It might take 5 years, we thought. Yeah. Of course, it took a little longer. So we had a panel last night. I don't know how many of you were here for that, but that was the old geezers of VR. That's what OG stands for, in case you weren't sure. So the old geezers got together and kind of went to the way back and talked about what didn't work and all that. So we don't really need to belabor that, but it's kind of more about reviewing that to talk about the principles that we're into, that brought us together, and why we think this is still such a damn good idea. So
let's fast forward a little bit.
Yeah,
right?
let's go. So that's the preamble. That's why we're here, and that's why it's us up here.
Well, so there's a really interesting question, right, which has come up several times, which is, why would you even think about the web or the internet when you're thinking about mixed reality? I'll say augmented reality in particular, right? I mean, this is, if you come to the very first one of these, it was pure AR focused, right?
Right.
And you and I had some discussions around this, and I think are really important, both about what was available at the time and some of the hardware, and what has changed with that, but also just the nature of the web, right? That is the accessibility of the web and the difference between experiences. And so what I mean by that is, and I guess I will cheat a little bit, go back a little bit, but there were some magazines, people have been doing advertising with early fiducial or marker-based AR for a long time. And the thing that was so challenging about it was you would have to download an app to see the cover of a magazine, right? So think about that for a moment. Imagine every time you wanted to read an article, you had to download an app for each individual article. And I'll ask the question, is that the kind of mixed reality world you would like to have? Right?
Well, I mean, the web wouldn't exist if that's the way it had to work. I mean, back in the day, it would have been downloading a PDF, or I think, PDFs were around then. So having to download each of those articles all the time, I mean, never would have happened, never would have taken up, as opposed to, I see a thing, someone shared a link with me, or someone told me an address to go to, you had to type, it wasn't that easy in the beginning, but you type that URL, you'd find it, and you get the stuff. You go back tomorrow, and the stuff's there again, and it's different stuff, right? So yeah, the web never would have happened. So clearly there's that sort of instant access. I mean, there's so many ways we can slice this. There's the technology aspects to this. There's the social and economic aspects to this. There's the content creation aspects. There's the UI. I mean, Charlie was talking about this in his talk yesterday, and I think a lot of us think this way. In an augmented world of smart glasses of the future, if we think we're going to be walking around seeing stuff at our whim and based on our intent, you're not going to have an app install and download dialogue you go through for each little thing you see with your magic glasses. That's not going to happen, right?
That will make my eyes bleed.
Yes, that will make your eyes bleed. So that's kind of a forcing function on that thing, right? But what we groove on, even though we're taking very different approaches to this stuff between, say, Unity and Mozilla, from a technology standpoint, though there are some overlaps, by the way. If we have time, we should get into this more, is that I think both of our companies are really dedicated to democratization. We've already brought it up, right? This is all about any content creator being able to build, distribute anywhere, any user being able to experience, unfettered, and of course having the freedom of choice on all the hardware and all the different platforms, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think we've spoken to a number of people last night, early today, and in previous conferences about the ways in which we create and consume and the symmetry around those, right? You don't want one or two creators. That means you don't get this amazing long tail of innovation. And I think there are a number of ways to do that, right? That's everything from like the kind of work that you're doing in Unity, and awesome when it gets exported out into some of these web platforms as well. There are tools, right? Whether you're doing 3JS or you're just doing something on Glitch where you write something up very quickly and it shows up. And I think one of the places where it feels important and where you see that, and this goes back to the early web, right, is you could I could write a bit of text with a couple of weird brackets, and then suddenly someone on the other side of the planet could see that, right? And I could see what they had created. And to do that today...
With view source.
Yes.
You go in and get the source code and copy it, and then you make your own web page.
Well, this is
just like that.
This is how my son is learning. I have a pair of 11-year-old twins, and they're kind of Wonder Twin-like creatures, or maybe pirate twins, I don't know. And so they both are interested in the web. It's a little young for them to have to learn quaternions, and all of the math that you have
I
to
still
do.
break into a cold sweat. Don't even.
All right, it makes
I will
everybody
never
think it's
understand quaternions.
right. Nobody does. Nobody does. And they can write a little bit of text, right? A little bit of something that says, "Oh, put a 3D cube out there in the world." That feels powerful. And when you talk to somebody who has showed up making an example of something in Toxem Square, I think we had talked about this before, that might not necessarily make it through an app store, right? That's expression. That lets people create the things that they wouldn't be able to create otherwise. So it's both the tools and the ability to put it out there in the world.
But Sean, VR is hard. VR is different. It's so much harder than just making a web page, isn't it? A lot of people say that, right? I mean,
What are you doing about that?
well, we do have Webgl Explorer, and you've probably heard us talk about Tiny Unity. So it's this ongoing project. It's a 2D runtime right now that'll have 3D and AR in it soon enough. We haven't committed to dates, but you can get the eval version of Tiny now, which is a much smaller version of the Unity engine for lightweight things, and lightweight things like web use cases, top of mind, messenger games, a lot of different use cases like that where you can't have the full power of the Unity engine. You don't even need it. It's kind of a sledgehammer. And the needs have been there and latent for a long time. The business hadn't lined up until very recently where it became important. Like Unity's getting it from all fronts, from even these industrial use cases or wherever. The need to support web, it's coming from different places like that, not the ones that would be obvious necessarily to us as a business. But for the years before that, the App Store, the packaged mobile game, the whole thing, that was the business. And that's been Unity's business, and that's how we exploded when mobile exploded. Though I don't know how many of you folks know this, but in the early days of Unity, it was a web plugin. That's when I discovered Unity. That's when I met David Helgeson. So the company's been into the web for a long time. It's just the technical approaches and lining that up with a business have been very interesting. And when WebGL was starting to take off, were you at Mozilla then? I can't remember when you joined there. So this was like 2011. Vlad had built it in 2009. Vlad works at Unity now, by the way. Anyway, so WebGL was starting to take off, and this cross-compilation Mscripton WebAssembly thing was brewing, and at GDC, I think maybe 2012, Unity showed off export into WebGL, and they were one of the first champions of it. But again, it's been in the state for a long time where it's been a big mass of code. And it isn't really, that whole approach isn't needed in a world where you can build a game for PC and deliver it on Steam, or build it for the App Store. So the cross-compilation thing's been cool, but it's never really sort of found a commercial use case that's been great. There's a couple of things on the margins. So I'm excited for the Tiny project, but that wasn't actually where I was going when I was mentioning this whole thing. Thank you for leaning into advertising Unity, but I didn't mean to do that. What I meant is there's a mentality in terms of this idea that you can democratize 3D creation and VR creation, that there's been resistance to that. There's been a bit of a manic defense by folks who I think who want to maybe be the experts or the priestcraft, or maybe folks just really do think 3D's too hard. We're never going to be able to figure out how to create open standards for it, how to make the tools easy enough. But I think it's just a work in progress.
Yeah, but that's our job, right, is to do the hard work for people so
100.
that they can create, right? I mean, that's one of the things that's been exciting for us about having Firefox Reality, right? A VR and AR browser that shows up on every platform. Like, you go to a website today and you really don't care whether you're on a Windows machine, an iPhone or Android, whether you're on a Mac or a Linux machine or the weird thing you built in your basement.
Raspberry Pi thing.
The Raspberry Pi thing, right. It works in all of those places, right? And we've got Firefox Reality coming out with Steam, right, this summer. And work with HTC.
This browser is the farthest along in terms of supporting these emerging standards. WebXR, it's being called now. It used to be called WebVR. In terms of just implementing all the platforms.
Right, and we can't. You can't do it alone.
You may be the
great
equalizer.
Right?
Firefox may be the thing that really just kind of makes this thing take off in terms of this browsing capability. But now I may have to take a jab at you. When the hell is it going to really, when are things going to ship? When is this WebXR spec going to finalize? When are the commercial browsers really going to do this? When am I going to get WebAR on my phone while we're at it? I mean, we have these great technologies like 8th Wall and Genie now that are just doing great in JavaScript to help out. But there's browser level, we could be doing so much more. And I'm personally irritated about this because of my long history at this, but then I was also the person who brought the WebVR meetup to San Francisco, and it was the summer of 2014. So
some of these things take time.
Like, when is this going to happen?
Yeah, so, I mean, the great thing is that it's like all good responses, it depends, right? So you mentioned Eighth Wall. We saw a demo last night. They're doing that today, right? You can do a lot of these things today, and inside of enterprises, they're finding all sorts of experimental ways to do this. You can, and it shows up on the phones, it shows up on all the devices, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm shocked by how well it works, actually.
Right? I mean, you know, the frame rates, all of these things mean that the web engines themselves, I mean, maybe it's worth talking about some of the, I will get slightly technical for just a moment, which is that generally you can do almost anything on the web. It's just how fast it's going to run, because you can do these, what's called a polyfill. So you're kind of faking, you're doing some interpretation around it, right? And so that's what some of these companies are doing. The engines to run that are so fast now that you can get SLAM working, you can get detection working, you can get all of these things working.
And there's been this perception ongoing for a long time that that's not possible.
That's right.
The web is slow.
Yeah.
Or that WebGL can't do X, Y, or Z in terms of rendering.
That's right. But there are other standards aspects of that, right? And so that's happening this summer with the first releases of the VR portions of that. And by the end of the year, the rest of it should all be done. You have the experiments shipping. So most of the browsers do a pretty open process for this, right? And then that in the browsers for next year. And so you're able to do a lot of that today. Certainly all the enterprises get to do that today. And then next year, you get it fully baked in. That gives you all the speed. It also gives you some of these other things. We were talking backstage. Again, my apologies, just a little bit deeper, but the web has changed so much. We have new technologies like WebAssembly and new programming languages like Rust that accelerate this thing to the point where they are running like native code. Except for anybody who wants to actually do enterprise work, or anybody who wants to just put up their piece of art, or someone who's actually trying to create a business, they don't necessarily have to go through an app store. They can just put it up. Going back to the easy part, my son presses a button, right? It's up on the server. He saved the file, right? And now he's showing all of his friends what that experience is like. If you're in an enterprise, being able to do that instead of getting enterprise certificates and all this other crazy shit,
right.
Oh my God, right?
Yeah, and you get the one IT person installing whatever it goes everywhere, right? Because it's just web code.
Then the large company takes away your enterprise certificate.
Exactly. So I'm also just going to sound like I'm cranky a little bit about this and frustrated, but the other thing that doesn't help with these perceptions is I think we still have a lack of really good, beautiful content that's been built for WebXR at this point. We're inching our way toward there. The little nuggets we're seeing, the related technologies are basically WebXR, if you broaden the definition a little bit. Facebook's 3D posts. The stuff Snap's doing with all their lenses, that's web tech under the covers, 100%, Spark AR, Unity's AR ads, it's all built on a web stack. Eker from Google whipped up that thing which bridged a browser and ARKit and ARCore. I took that code and wrote the prototype for this thing that became our AR ad stuff. It was that easy because, open source and et cetera. But those are little nuggets of AR, content, like filtery level stuff. What we're not seeing yet is, then we see stuff like Steph showing and, ILM's making presentations here, and you get that high production value. We haven't seen that. I can't remember the last high production web thing I've seen with some graphics. Back to Rome or something like that.
It's like fantastic work from Sketchfab, right?
Oh, yeah, the model level or the simple little button, it's true. There's some really good stuff on Sketchfab. And that's a good counterpoint.
There are companies, Amazon's a good example, right? They have, I don't know if they have many, many people making 3D models of all of that work, right? That the content is exploding, and it's exactly the kind of content that makes those experiences great. And so you have people who are now teaching classes, they're creating educational work, and it's kind of like that first, it's interesting, not unlike the beginnings of the internet, where you have in the schools, people getting new tools for creation. They're able to take the content and actually high quality content. Again, the work at Sketchfab is one of the sort of major ones, been fantastic, right? say, AAA artists.
Yeah, I mean, it's spotty, but there's definitely a lot of good art there.
Right, and it feels like the beginnings of that long arc. Right? And I guess the last piece I'd add on around
Really? Just another 5 years?
No,
Window.
most of this accelerates, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have people who are actually making money. I've talked to some folks today, right, who are doing that on the web with AR, right? You'd like to hear that more of that, but it's a great start. I think the other thing we want to make sure we think about is not just to let the infrastructure and the systems happen to us. We really want to create the mixed reality world we want. And so, yeah, that takes a little bit of a strong spine, takes a little bit of hard work. But if we build in some of these monetization things, if we build in the ways for people to create, all the creative tools that you guys are making, right, that actually enables this kind of an ecosystem.
And I think it requires some thoughtful leaning into it, a la what Mike Pell was talking about yesterday morning. I was sad I couldn't go to his talk as we were up against each other. In his book, The Age of Smart Information, it's like starting to think about designing for a future we are now expecting, which is, powered by the machine on the back end, tons of AI, and spatial computing on the front end. But in between those endpoints, content has to be created with that in mind. And it's not just 3D to be rendered. It's information that reveals itself. It's a whole heady mess of stuff that Mike's book is super deep.
Yeah.
I hope you got to catch his talk yesterday. So I think so. But I do think we're not quite there yet. We're at this next stage, back to what you were saying about these tools are now coming online. So you're feeling it, like this is imminent. You think when these browsers, when the ink's dry on the spec, when these browsers ship, sounds later this year, early next year.
You already get it.
You're already shipping.
I was going to say, you can get Firefox Reality today with, it's bundled with folks at HTC, who I believe are here, right?
Yeah.
You get those experiences today. You can create for those experiences today. And in the next coming years, you will see much, much more of that. I think one of the pieces, and I know we've got about a minute left, I want to make sure we actually get the scenario out, right? But it's one of those things where the more and more people are contributing to that, the faster and faster it goes.
And that's the power of the internet, because then you get that multiplying factor for sure. Right. And I think it's, tools like when Unity's got the tiny mode and it's really working on AR and 3D and VR. Tools like
45
Torch.
seconds. Yeah. You got to give your scenario at the end.
Well, no, we're doing scenarios. I was just going to say, you've got me excited now. I'm starting to feel it. Occasionally I get a little too wizened about this kind of thing where it's like, yeah, sure. And I don't want to, get ahead of myself again. But you're saying these pieces are actually coming together. So, I want to leave it at that. I want to give you the last word, my man. Tell us what's going to happen.
Well,
what's next? What's the next couple of years look like?
What I'm hoping for, and what we are working together with multiple stakeholders, and many of the people in the audience, is how we actually make that future, right? I will say that the things that I want to make sure we have are something that's like a curiosity engine. You can always poke in, you can always understand. Something that is the creation engine. You had mentioned view source.
Yeah.
And if we can view source everything around us, that is powerful, right? It means that a new generation gets to create. And that last one, which is the value exchange, the monetization, right? And I think there's a whole new blue ocean opportunity.
Yeah, we barely talked about that. That's probably good, right?
Yeah, that's for beers.
People will
after
figure
this.
it out. Yeah, good. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Sean, I can't believe we don't do this more often.
Well,
this was really good.
Next time, beers up in San Francisco.
All right.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thanks.
Oh, God, you dropped my thing.